Hi guys, I am just trying a new mic setup, but I'm gonna play around with it after. Hopefully some folks have joined. We can get it started. One of these days I will schedule a complex theory track discussion when not on a day where the only reason I'm putting a brow on is to have the complex theory discussion, where I actually look like I tried. I'm looking for where I put my headphones the last time I did this. I was so like, okay, let me just sit down and make sure I log on at 4. And I'm trying to figure out how to. Dang. Oh, there goes the lid to my water bottle. All right, we're just going to get a windy. Sorry, you're going to hear my computer fan. We're going to try whatever. Let's just get into this discussion. The skin is clear. We put our pants on good because I was about to sit down on here with no pants on, and you would have gotten a really cute view. All right, so per the comment that Adira left on, thank you, or Alana left on the post announcing that I was going to do this live today. She said that we stopped at the use of dialogue and assessing knowledge claims. Experience as a criterion of meaning, the ethics of caring. Oh, I have so many notes in here. My goodness. Towards truth. All right. I'm trying to find my way. The ethics. I think we really only did do half of chapter 11 the last go around. Okay. So we are going to pick up from the ethics of caring. So in my edition of the book, that is 281. And I will say, again, when it comes to these types of readings, the best thing you can do for yourself is grab the syllabus. We do a purposeful, very thoughtful job. I just got the syllabus for the next book we're reading on the general track, which is Women of Brewster Place. And I'm just like, oh, this is amazing. I'm so happy with it. But we purposefully think through how to really make these readings accessible to a wide community of people. And so a book like Black Feminist Thought, which is traditionally read in college classrooms, we broke it down to just 2 chapters. We've dragged this one out extra long because, in the middle of reading this, a lot of people got stay-at-home orders, and that changed the way their day-to-day lives. And that took, for someone like myself who lives by myself and works by myself, and I work from home, it still took me a bit of readjusting to the fact that a lot of things that I relied on were no longer open, and I had to live differently. So we wanted to give people the space and time to be able to. Oh, I feel so bad about the audio, but give people the space and time to really be able to get their personal life together and not miss out on these important conversations we wanted to have around the books we're reading. This is gonna be. It's gonna look. The video's gonna look great, but it's just gonna be so windy. And I'm like, I know my Hold on, let me get it 1 second because I need to get my iPad anyway, and I need to pull up my copy of the syllabus so we can really get into this. And we've been reading this book since March 15th. It doesn't feel like that. I don't know. For me, it doesn't feel like that long. And because we're only reading this book in, hold on. You know what I could do? You know what I could do to alleviate the airiness of this audio? Is just plug my clip-in mic directly into my laptop, which is what I might do. Do I have all the right pieces though? Hello? Okay. Hopefully that's not too obnoxious. Alright, hopefully you can still hear me. I don't know if anybody in these. Let me look in the Facebook group and see if anybody's watching. Because there are no comments populating. You can always just say hi to a hoe. Make me feel like I'm not just talking to myself into the ever-loving vacuum of nothingness. Let's see if this even comes to the top of the page. Oh, man. Oh, that is the weird part. Even when I go live. Okay. Okie dokie. Hey, Kanisha. Hey, Tanya. Where was you at on Thursday? We was looking for you when we was talking about feminism. Hello, Chris. How are you doing? Let me go into the Facebook group and share this to the top of the page so folks know that we are in here. Hello, Denisha. So lovely to see you again. Thank you, everybody. Oh, it is at the top. You know what's weird is you're on your phone. Like, I have the Facebook app on my phone, and it just doesn't. When you go to groups, like, I always have to, like, I'll go into the group and I'll be like, oh, nothing was posted today, and I have to remember to double refresh it because it won't pull up the new stuff. I guess, I don't know, girl. I don't want to be projecting what Zuckerberg is scamming himself into, but I don't like the way the phone app treats stuff. Hello, Yelana. How are you doing? I hope you're saying your name correctly. All right, let's get into this, get to the right page in the syllabus. I said, oh, was it that brief? All right, the ethics of caring. So we will be transitioning after this chat. We'll be transitioning into chapters 1 and 2. We're a little behind on getting the syllabus done for that one, but we should have that published by Tuesday. You don't have to buy a new book anyway. You know, we're just going to keep on chucking. And yeah, we'll finish this book out probably like late June, and then we'll have Dr. Collins. I just need to schedule when she's going to come in and have the discussion. I'm also a little nervous because the consensus is that there's a lot to disagree with in the book, and we didn't really read the disagreeable parts. We just read the ending and then the beginning, or we're going to just read the ending and the beginning, but we're going to work it out. You know, let me not think too far ahead. Let's just get into this actual discussion here. Hello, Dee. How are you doing today? Okay. Dad. I don't actually think that we discuss the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims. Because I feel like I just read this, but let's just go back over it anyway, because this section in chapter 11, and in my copy of the book is 279, in the PDF, dag, it's halfway through chapter 11. She does do big headers. So there are several prints of this book, and once we get into chapter 12, well, not once we get into chapter 12, but chapter 12 is an addition in the more recent prints of this book. I think the copy that I have is from where's the ISBN page? 2000. Oh, this is a 2009 copy, actually. So, this is the second edition of the book. So there's a preface to the first edition, preface to the second edition. All right, so the book, she's expanded on the book. So I don't think chapter 12 is in some of the earlier prints, but I do believe the PDF that we have in the book club, and I need to remember my own daggone hashtag that I use for the files to make them, I think it's like SBG Digital Library or something. Dag, if I see original post. Yes, it's hashtag SBG Digital Library, all as one, and it'll pull up all the files we have, and we do have the entirety of Black Feminist Thought in the PDFs. Get you a good PDF reader, like Goodreader, on your tablet or iPad, and we'll be good to go. But this section, the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims, it really kind of lays out the foundation of the way we thought about the book club, and having dialogue be a way in which we grow the book club and the way in which we make the readings more accessible. An essential part that we felt like was missing from a lot of other book clubs to just say, okay, we're going to read this. Maybe we'll do a few in-person meetups in popular cities, but the dialogue wasn't as congruent or a central theme within the club. And in the positions that Dr. Collins is making is about using dialogue and also being inclusive of the lived experiences of Black women, because if we've been excluded from the academy or the institutions of higher learning, or like these Ivy League institutions, then we're not going to be, like, how do we get to, if they're the vehicles at which we did, knowledge is validated, right, that epistemology happens, then Black women are being, because we're not allowed into these spaces, we're going to be excluded from that process. And so rethinking how this process happens, particular to how we validate knowledge for within the theory of Black feminism. Let me go back. So, per the syllabus, this section focuses on the role of dialogue and language in knowledge production and understanding. Collins surveys the use of call and response, African-based oral traditions, and other forms of communication to assert her claim that Black women intellectuals invoke their relationships and connectedness by way of dialogue. The role of Black women as leaders and matriarchs in families, churches, and other community organizations provide them with a strong sense of support for creating a long-lasting dialogue that directly contributes to Black feminist epistemology. So the questions we can consider: what is the benefit of Black women using dialogue to assess knowledge claims? And I actually think that comes from when she quotes June Jordan, which is on page 280 in my copy. She says, the quote is from, she says that June Jordan's analysis of Black English points to the significance of this dimension of our alternative epistemology, and Collins is defining an alternative epistemology as one that foundationally uses dialogue. Our language is a system constructed by people constantly needing to insist that we exist. The assumption of the presence of life governs all of Black English. Every sentence assumes the living and active participation of at least two human beings, the speaker and the listener. Collins goes on to say that many Black women intellectuals invoke the relationship and connectedness provided by use of dialogue. And then she quotes Will Jones, who, when asked why she chose the themes she did, and I'm not really familiar with Jones' work, but she says she was interested in oral traditions of storytelling, Afro-American and others, in which there is always the consciousness and importance of the hearer. And so Collins, thank you, Fadumo says that the section we're focusing on starts on page 277 in the PDF. So it seems like the PDF maybe is only 2 pages off from where I'm at. Collins does seem to be making the point, and I don't know, there's like a question mark in my head. I don't know if I can really parse out the question mark, because am I just so consumed with the way that I've been taught how to validate knowledge through traditional, like, Eurocentric institutions, that this idea that, oh, well, do I really believe that Black people inherently, the way we talk always, well, like in 2020 at least, and maybe this might be an issue of generations, or a generational issue, that Black people, the language that we use, always consider that there is somebody listening, the listener and the speaker. I think that's giving a lot of grace to what I want to call niggas, but you know, hey. How do we validate information or knowledge in our day-to-day lives? And so when I get to that question in the syllabus, it is like, okay, well, yeah, I do think we do use language and a dialogue to validate knowledge within our own, like, how do I, especially in this age of social media where there's so much misinformation targeted at the African American community, how do I decide what I perceive as fact versus fiction? Because now that's become a much more complicated question. And so I would love to hear how are you guys validating information or knowledge in your day-to-day lives? And what is the role and importance of language in constructing culture? I do actually think that when it comes to culture, which is part of, the knowledge base, is part of the validating knowledge process, right? Because what knowledge do you have around your culture, and what knowledge does your culture imbue you with. And language is a central part of the culture. It might be a little bit difficult for us collectively as Black Americans to grasp onto, because we do have this reoccurring theme that we supposedly don't have a culture, or that our culture is not as validated as others, and therefore the language that we have and and really the diversity of that language makes it not a cultural marker, you know? But, however, I do wish that we had a better nomenclature to define um, the different silos of African American culture. But when you get into chapter 12, where she's talking about the power dynamics, and you know, the five or the four types of power, the structural domain of power, then the disciplinary domain of power. I actually think some of the ways in which I might struggle with connecting all the dots here is because of the structural and disciplinary domains of power that have curated the way that I've come to my own, the way I've seen the knowledge process work, right? I do think some of this challenges the way that I am naturally inclined to think, but is the way that I'm inclined to think, is it really natural, or have I just, gone through the traditional Eurocentric institutions of learning? And I'm inclined to snub my own community in a certain way when I think about the process of knowledge validation. I don't know if I agree with. How does she go back? Oh, these page numberings that are in the syllabus are for a different edition. Women tend to ground their epistemological premises in metaphors, suggesting finding a voice, speaking, and listening. Language is particularly important as Black women routinely utilize these knowledges in their knowledge production process. I don't know. Do any of y'all have thoughts? I did think the ending of this section struck me as a very binary take. She says, in contrast to the visual metaphors, such as, and this is on 281, well, the end, whatever the page, the end of the section comes for you. For instance, in contrast to the visual metaphors, such as equating knowledge with illuminations, knowing with seeing, and truth with light, that scientists and philosophers typically use, women tend to ground their epistemological premises in metaphors. Okay, that's a full quote that is quoted in the syllabus, suggesting finding a voice, speaking, and listening. All right, let's move on to the ethics of caring. Simply put, these page numbers are like 13 pages off for me. Oh, I think she had an ebook version. Simply put, the ethic of caring suggests that personal expressiveness, emotions, and empathy are central to the knowledge validation process. This means that the role of the empathetic individual is centered and meaningful in knowledge production and dissemination. The importance of emotional engagement via arguments and discussion is a key component of this ethic as well. One of the three interrelated components of the ethic of caring is the emphasis placed on individual uniqueness, rooted in a tradition of African humanism, a unique expression of common spirit, power, or energy inherent in all life. Ah, yeah, we did. Okay, well, discussed it again. Ha ha ha. there were objections in the ways women and men approach epistemology by identifying women's approaches as softer and communal in men. Yes. Was that actually in the... I felt like she made that like feminine, masculine argument in an earlier section. in the lived experience, but you're probably right, girl. I be having ADHD. But I didn't highlight anything other than saying this is binary. But thank you. A second component of the ethic of caring concerns the appropriateness of emotions and dialogues. Emotions indicate that a speaker believes in the validity of the argument. Do I agree with that? A third component of the ethic of caring involves developing the capacity for empathy. Black women writers often explore the growth of empathy as part of the ethic of caring. I don't know, because we read Sula, right? And I wouldn't strike. I mean, maybe. Did Nell's character, maybe there was a really large commentary on the ethics of caring, right? Because she is addressing what is their care rooted in. Like, who do they care for? Who do they care about? Right? And as soon as Sula passed away, you know, their perceived care of their own children dissipated because it wasn't an actual care for their child. They cared about valuing themselves over another person. So, you know what I mean? Dr. Collins making a bitch think. Okay. Increased understanding of each person's position. She must have a lot of nice people in her life. The ethic of caring and assessing knowledge claims occurs in the use of the call and response discourse mode in many Black churches. The sound of what is being said is just as important as the words themselves in what is, in a sense, a dialogue of reason and emotion. As a result, it is nearly impossible to filter out the strictly linguistic, cognitive, abstract meaning from the socio-cultural, psycho-emotive meaning. And I mean, that's a really complex sentence to say that you can't take what someone says without hearing the way they say it, right? Things do get lost in translation of verbalizing audibly via textually. I'm just making up more complex words myself to say the same damn thing sis just said. But Fadumo says, it kind of sounds like these three components are aligned with the narrative in of Me Too or any other similar stories, where we are asked to validate and believe the speaker survivor. I'm beginning to wonder if Collins is talking about the early stages of introducing new content, story of slaves, like people in white world, survivors of whatever trauma, before their stories are put in some sociological framework. That is a really good point. I mean, I think, and I keep thinking about why did I struggle through where I landed with this while I was reading it, right? Like what, and maybe it's because I do live in a social media age, and I am thinking about the ways in which language has changed because of social media, because of Twitter, because of character limits. And so to say that, like, you know, the ethics of caring kind of strikes me as odd because I'm like, people on Twitter don't care. And I think there's not a commitment to that. But to Fadumo's point that, yeah, you know, when we think of these stories, like the Me Too movement, and the stories of people that are considered outliers, and we as Black women are often considered a community of outliers, before we, in context to specifically, because this chapter is talking about the process of knowledge validation, right? So before we simply extrapolate it as, well, no, it's A plus B equals C, and there's no other way to get to C, that do we understand, are we thinking through the different ways in which our process is different from outside a European lens? And if the sociological framework still heavily relies on a Western European lens, then her argument about the ethics of caring, um, or the several components of the ethics of caring, makes more sense. If I constantly remind myself, okay, well, how are we typically processing the process of knowledge validation? How are we typically getting to that point, and how much of the system that process goes through heavily relies structurally on a European, Eurocentric lens. And European is a nice way to say white, American, the white man way of doing that. The significance of individual uniqueness, personal expressiveness, and empathy in African American communities thus resembles the importance that some feminist analysis places on women's inner voice. I do still think, though, that Dr. Collins is very graceful here. Maybe a little too graceful. That we think that the communities we come from in a way that we can generalize that they resemble the importance of individual uniqueness, personal expressiveness, and empathy. Empathy. Well, I have a whole lot of notes on the next couple of pages. I feel like you can't even see. Then scribbled all up and down. What does Collins leave out in saying that black women, analogous to white women, have had the community of the church that encouraged the ethics of caring? And how she distinguishes that. Black men, how she distinguishes that black men have to resolve the contradiction of masculinity. Do women not have contradictions that inhibit the ethics of caring? That was my question on the ending of this section. Girl, it's okay. All I do is ramble, so please join me in the rambling. She recognizes this isn't some in academic language yet. Before it gets there, we recognize and appreciate the stories of women, poor people, marginalized people for what they are. Yeah, I think maybe for me, because I'm so conscious of the amount of disinformation or misinformation that surrounds us, that coming up with this idea that, okay, well, yeah, and I do identify as a black feminist, and therefore I do have an investment in the ethics of caring towards including black women in the process of knowledge validation. But to say that I don't even feel comfortable just saying I am at the root of it going to appreciate every story inherent to someone's identity of being a black woman or coming from a marginalized community. Because niggas be scamming. And that's all I kept thinking is niggas be scamming. Do you not know any scammers, Dr. Collins? So the takeaway points pointed out in the syllabus, the theme of talking with the heart taps the ethic of caring, another dimension of an alternative epistemology used by African American women. The ethic of caring, which is where that was the ending point that I was like, huh? Suggests the personal expressiveness, emotions, and empathy. I can't even say the damn word no more. Empathy are essential to the knowledge validation process. So the three interrelated components of the ethic of caring are emphasis placed on individual uniqueness. Isn't that like, don't we then get into identity politics with that though? Emphasis, appropriateness of emotions in dialogue, and developing the capacity for empathy. I mean, I think this is something. It's not something that I know. I'm stressing that I've had a difficult time with this section in particular, but it isn't something that I'm stressing as though it is not a consideration. You know, it will now forever be here, and maybe I will think a little bit more broadly about things. The ethics of personal accountability. I didn't really. This is a really short section, And overall, for me, when you talk about personal accountability, how do we then also address um, class hierarchy, class stratification, right? And that I agreed, but how does this thinking, but how does this work against us vis-a-vis class stratification? This ethic focuses on individuals and their role in developing Black feminist epistemology. Ultimately, the argument Collins makes is that the knowledge claims made by individuals whom are respected for their moral and ethical connections to their ideas will hold more value and integrity than those offered by less respected individuals. What are the pluses and minuses of the two above positions for African American women? And the takeaway points say Collins argues not only that persons are responsible for their knowledge claims, but also the assessments of an individual's knowledge claims, simultaneously evaluate an individual's character, values, and ethics. This idea goes against traditional Western philosophical theory, which says that a person's argument should be evaluated on its merits, independent of the person making the argument. I mean, that's a Western philosophical theory, but in praxis, is it really? Are we really going that route? Is it really? Is that really it? Okay, no, because I don't think we are really. I think we have ever evaluated the merit of something independent of the person making the argument in the canon of Western thought. I had highlighted the section where she talks about by requesting data on dimensions of his personal life, routinely excluded in positive approaches of knowledge validation, they invoked lived experience of a criterion of meaning. They used this information to assess whether he really cared about his topic and drew on this ethic of caring and advancing their knowledge claims about his work. Furthermore, they refused to evaluate the rationality of his written ideas without some indication of his personal credibility as an ethical human being. As much as I would be inclined to say, okay, well, yeah, we should think about the positives and negatives of this. I mean, I do this all the time when I be reading books about Black folks written by Black men, and it's like, is he married to a Black woman though? See, it colors the way I was reading a fiction book, Underground. The whole time I'm reading the book, I'm like, there ain't no way in hell this Black man who wrote this book is married to a Black woman, because the main character is a Black woman, and it's not hitting, it's not correlating. Something ain't right. Some of the milk ain't clean. I don't know how many times I've read things and been like, this man don't love Black women. He ain't said nothing offensive either. It just seeps through the page, to pull a Dr. Umar meme. Leave your white wife at home. So, as much as I might be inclined to say, to question and wanted to think more heavily about how this line of thinking, that this theory that Collins pushed forward, could actually be harmful to us. I also acknowledge that I inherently do this. So she again is on to something. All right. Nisha says, that's a good question. I think that when I first read this, I was really compelled by emotion, especially because anger is used to invalidate Black women. But I also think emotions can be manipulated. Yes. To address the question about what Collins is leaving out, it seems like she recognizes that Black men are confronted with a certain contradiction, but so are women immensely. Religious institutions give power to men always. Women who are outside the bounds of respectability, say, talking about oppression in the Black community, can be seen as disruptive and therefore not supportive. So that's going back to the section of the ethics of caring. My question, I was kind of thinking, out of the body of work that, the sector of academics that Dr. Collins comes from, there, like Evelyn Higginbotham at Harvard, right? She has the book that Righteous Discontent, which is where the term respectability politics was coined. And there is a lot of research that comes out that, particular to the Black American experience. And, my question when I was reading this is like, well, I get it. She's writing from not just a Black American lens, but she's writing from a Black American Christian lens. And doesn't that leave out that there are Black American folks, since we've been in this country, who are not Christian? But particular to the lens that she's writing from as a Black American Christian, the Black Baptist Church, and if it wasn't the Baptist Church, it was AME, and then, coming into post-1960s, the Kojic Church, or the post-1940s Kojic, the Black Church was one of the few safe spaces Black women could gather in up and through the 1970s. So I think maybe because I have, from my modern lens, when I read it, it's like I understand it because I've read the history and I know the canon that Dr. Collins comes from. So I get it, but like the world in which I live in, you have to think a little bit more diversely when you're discussing theories that apply to Black women. And so that was my question about the church, right? Well, what about the mosque, or I don't know, what other places of worship might Black women, and what about Black women who never fed into religion? I don't know. So and then you also think about the harm in which the church creates, because as we say, respectability politics really kind of was a way to disarm. I don't want to say universally disarm Black women, but it did a lot to disarm and harm Black women unless they fit into a very binary mode, which is what was been hit on in Eloquent Rage with Dr. Brittany Cooper, and also in Hood Feminism, right? If you don't fit into this nice young lady mold, who really supports you? And so I thought that was an interesting position to say that the tradition of the ethics of caring came out of that faction of Black culture. African Americans consider it essential for individuals to have definite positions on issues and assume full responsibility for arguing their validity. I found the statement to be interesting and a bit true. So that means you found it to be a bit not true as well? And what parts did you find to be not true? My whole thing is, that's, again, I keep wanting to say she's giving niggas a lot of grace. And maybe I just know too many bots. You know what I mean? Do we really believe that we have, that as an individual, yeah, I guess, because people that I think that don't feel they have the responsibility to argue their point have red-pilled themselves. It reminds me of when Dr. Cooper talked about how our desires are political and it can shape our ethics and knowledge production, but it's a slippery slope. Do our personal lives always have to play a role in how our knowledge is validated? That is you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I just some niggas ain't shit. Do we have to include them? They inherently ain't shit. And you know what I was thinking about, the dialogue thing, is because my ex is one of the first things I said to this nigga is you are loquacious. He a lying ass nigga, but he lies really good because he just starts talking. And he has a really good grasp on the English language. And because he's a man and he's a Black man, this is Black feminist, so you're I think his ability to talk and get away with things because he talks is inherent to his masculinity, right? Because I felt like I couldn't do that. But is that just I'm also a person committed to kindness and integrity, so would I never even attempt to do that? Like, could I get up and just start talking and have people be like, oh, wow, you're so smart. I'm not even going to counter your argument. I'm just going to believe what you have to say because you are so well spoken. I felt like the difference between he and I and our ability to do that was because he's a man and he's a black man and he's going to be perceived as empathetic. Like, not, is it empathetic? Is that how, empathy? Yes, as having empathy. Yeah. Does this approach also work when the group is hegemonic? Yeah, I just didn't know. I thought the ethics of personal accountability left me with a lot of questions. Because I get the premise of it, right? The premise that it is sometimes important to consider, because again, as I was acknowledging, 15 minutes ago, because I just be talking, I acknowledge that in my process, my own personal process of knowledge validation, whether I take what someone is saying to heart or not, is that there have been plenty of times where I've read something critical of the black community, and I'm like, is he married to a black woman? Oh, he ain't. He don't care about us. He don't love us. Doesn't matter. Okay. So I participate on this, but to say this as a philosophical praxis on a larger scale, don't we also have to interrogate it before? You know what I mean? Like, shouldn't we think about what are the downsides to this? That, let's say I go to get my PhD in history and I'm talking about the history of low income black women, and someone says to me, well, you're not low income, so you can't speak on this topic. You can't position or posit certain things as fact because you are not of that community. And I think this is something that maybe I wouldn't be thinking about in 2008, but in 2020, I'm definitely more conscious of. All right. I am going to move on. There's a delay between when I see the comments, so I'm going to keep moving on to the next section so it's not just like silence on the replay, but I will go back as comments come in. Sorry for the confusion, but I hope we're trying to be cognizant. We are only going to do chapter 11 today. We'll come back next week and get someone else, not me, to do chapter 12. And then we'll do chapter 1 and 2 the next weeks after that, once we get the syllabi out. Okay? Black feminist thought as a knowledge that is specific to the interests and concerns of black women. These ideas of knowledge must be validated by black women. To be credible and accepted, to be you see how this is how my mind works. I be reading and skipping over a word, and it changes the whole meaning of the sentence. Let me go back. Please open your Bibles. Don't mind me. To be a credible and accepted contributor to black feminist thought, black feminist intellectuals must be personal advocates for their material, be accountable for the consequences of their work, have lived or experienced their material in some fashion, and be willing to engage in dialogues about their findings with ordinary, everyday, should have said poor, but she ain't, people. Black women dictating their own self-definition facilitated the endeavor of knowledge validation processes that were controlled in part or in full by black women. By Dr. Collins' standard, is this determining of which black women are able to produce knowledge rooted in elitism or classism? If Denisha would like to join the syllabi cohort, then she can lead the talks. Everyone that comes in and leads the conference that does the author chats, we pull from the cohort. And nobody was available this week, so that's why y'all got me right here, right now. really my preference to do these, but I usually just say, hey, who has time? And then the girls say, hey, I can do this. Oftentimes it's Morgan, because she's the most active member of the cohort. And a lot of folks are camera shy. Talking to a camera when you can't see your audience is actually, as I have learned, a skill. That's not shade, it's just a fact. And so it might be a little harder for me to get other folks to come in and do these things, which is why so often you get me. Because I will come on here and talk my yellow ass off regardless of what I know what I'm talking about or not. But there's a button on the website if you would like to join the cohort. We are always adding people. You just have to send in your resume, and if you have time, because that's another thing. This is a time commitment, and you have to prepare for stuff like this. And we're not paying a whole lot. We do pay. We give a little point. We give a little point, but it's not a whole lot of points. So there's a whole lot of things impacting this. I think this passage is true, but the part about having definite positions on issues doesn't sit well with me, because I think it doesn't give us space to change our minds or evolve. But I do believe we expect each other to stand behind what we say. I think that is a very ethical yes. Yes. And yes. I thought it was very important that she makes the point. And I think what she is, in part, even though get my syntax together, even though I do think Dr. Collins tiptoes into her own sort of classism, though I don't think she is consciously classist or consciously trying to be that, I felt like in this section that she was calling out how we can dabble in ourselves, classism, right? Because she says Black feminist thought must be validated by ordinary African American women who, in the words of Hannah Nelson, grow to womanhood in a world where the saner you are, the madder you may appear. You are made to appear. To be credible in the eyes of this group, Black feminist intellectuals must be personal advocates for their material, be accountable for the consequences of their work, have lived or experienced their material in some fashion, and be willing to engage in dialogues with their findings with ordinary, everyday people. And that 101%. Yes, ma'am. Yes, in particular, again, if we go back to the age, I spent a lot of time on Twitter, and I realized, particular, like, let's say dating, right? There's a lot of hot takes that are positioned as Black feminist theory around dating. And I do actually have radical politics when it comes to how I envision myself partnering. So I'm inclined to agree with a lot of it. But then I also realize that these people, you can't set these standards and judge people by this, right? If you haven't lived this experience. And that some of these takes weren't actually via a care and compassion or empathy for a larger Black woman community, but folks was bored and wanted to go viral. Something as simple as telling like a woman should never pay for anything. Is that and you could make the argument that somehow that's not necessarily Black feminist, but for whatever reason, the age of Twitter, the age of social media, of Twitter and like hypergamy, right? That there are women who have monetized or commodified their supposed Black feminism and suggested that, as a way to get back at men, that you never pay for anything. And if you do, you're belittling yourself. It's definitely been positioned on Twitter. Is that coming from a lived experience? Are you engaging with Black women who are everyday people? Are you considerate of what their circumstances would be? And I think dating is an easy point, right? Because on one side, it's don't date a dusty. Don't don't support a man. And then on the other side is, well, don't date at all, or, and everyone, there's so many different things that impact our day to day, right? We all, like, even though we're all Black women, we might have different religious beliefs. We might have different desires, wanting to have children, in a certain manner is greatly going to sway how you engage in your intimate partnerships. And so one thing that I've been very mindful, because this is always a popular topic to come on camera and discuss, is to not position anything I say as the panacea or the fix, especially because a lot of the stuff is positioned that Black women as what we need to fix in order for us to be better off. And how am I to say these things if I don't live in the hood? You know what I mean? I don't know what these women's experiences, intimately might be and why they're making the decisions they make. I'm not wealthy on the flip side either. I don't live in certain surroundings. And so, and I also have a certain amount of privilege in the way that I may go about things because of what I do. And so, if I'm not engaging, or I'm not even thinking, not only just engaging, but also thinking and being the ethics of caring. She might have got this somewhere about, all Black women, and even behind class stratification. What about trans Black women? What about non-binary people? What about people of different religious beliefs? What about people of different education access? What about different able-bodied people, differently able people? All these different things, all these identities that come in and shift the way, you put theory into praxis. We do have to be more cognizant of. Yes, Denisha, come apply for the cohort. And even if you are camera shy, if you are a person who takes copious notes, you can just write your notes out and then read them during the live. That's how you think I do my videos. Or my podcast on Patreon. I think scripting things, like if you're a person who takes a lot of notes. I was talking to somebody last night because I think we're going to start doing a poetry track, which is it's not going to be a track with a syllabus or like a formal track like general or complex theory, but because different people read at different paces, and we're trying not to be too aggressive about setting this mode of everyone has to read at this pace, giving something for people that might read something a little faster or just not reading what we're reading anyway, giving something to still engage them with. And I think poetry is really important. So we're going to have someone come in and start doing poetry. Why did I say that? I don't know. Something I thought. A penalty from whom? Traditionally, women engaged in the overarching intellectual and political project were blues singers, poets, autobiographers, storytellers, and orators. They became Black feminist intellectuals, both by intellectual work and by being validated as such by everyday Black women. Black women in academia could not openly join their ranks without incurring a serious penalty. And I said a penalty from whom? Because if we are pushing back against the European institution, the Eurocentric institutions, who said what? Right? And then doesn't this necessarily go against the point that you're making, that we have to engage and include ordinary, everyday Black women? The community of Black women scholars constitutes a second constituency whose epistemological standards must be met. Studying Black women's lives at all places, many careers at risk. I know this because I was trying to get into a PhD program so I could study Black women, and the niggas was like, what? For why? Go to the gender studies department. A third group whose epistemological standards must be met. So she's saying the Black women in the academy, their standards have to be met. Everyday Black women's standards have to be met. And then a third group is the dominant groups who still control. So we still got to go back to those Eurocentric white supremacist institutions and on some wavelength meet their standards. We have to have a process that matches theirs. How do Black women as agents of knowledge impact the dissemination and reception of their knowledge? And per the syllabus, Lorraine Hansberry expresses a similar idea. I believe that one of the most sound ideas in dramatic writing is that in order to create the universal, you must pay very great attention to specific. Universality, I think, emerges from the truthful identity of what is. Maybe. Alright. Moving on to the last section in chapter 11, and somehow me talking about half of the chapter 11 with all 8 of you watching has brought me through the whole hour. As the closing section of this chapter, Collins wrote to analyze and examine the taking for granted knowledge shared by African American women as a group. The more specialized knowledge produced by Black women intellectuals and the social conditions shaping both types of thought. Overall, the section serves as a brief recap of the previous section. She reiterates that Black women's unique access to the experience of being both Black and woman demands that an alternative epistemology that reflects the convergence of both of these experiences is crafted and prioritized. According to Collins, why do dominant groups suppress knowledge produced by any other oppressed group? What is meant by the idea of deconstruction? Collins argues that not only are persons responsible for their knowledge claims, but also their assessment of an individual's knowledge claims, simultaneously evaluating an individual's character, value, and ethics. Again, this goes against traditional Western philosophical theory, which says that a person's argument should be evaluated on its merits independent of a person making the argument. It says that, but it does not do that. And so what are the pluses and minuses of the two positions of African American women? She closes out this section with alternative epistemologies challenge all certified knowledge and open up the question of whether what has taken to be true can stand the test of alternative ways of validating truth. The existence of self-defined Black women's standpoint using Black feminist epistemology calls into question the content of what currently passes as truth and simultaneously challenges the process of arriving at the truth. And so overall, I overarchingly agree with this section, right? Because it is true, as she laid out at the beginning of the chapter, and then she again dives in at the end of the chapter, about the ways in which dominant groups oppress knowledge produced by oppressed groups. And that it's important that, you know, and this is a foundational Black feminist theory that replicates itself across all the areas of theory in the canon of Black feminism, is that, you know, the intersection of our identity as Black and woman, both factors of our identity need to be spoken to. In anything that's going to claim to be the framework for restorative justice, restorative liberation, you know, whatever is going to push us towards freedom, essentially, should always acknowledge that we are Black and woman. I'm going to you know, she does make the point, although it is tempting to claim that Black women are more oppressed than everyone else, and therefore have the best standpoint from which to understand their mechanisms, processes, and effects of the oppression. This is not the case. and that we are actually part of a larger group, and that, well, that there are many groups with whom using the epistemological processes growing from its unique standpoint become the most objective truths. Each group speaks from its own standpoint and shares its own partial situated knowledge. Because each group perceives its own truth as partial, its knowledge is unfinished. What is always needed in the appreciation of art, of life, is a larger perspective. Connections made, or at least attempted, where none existed before. The straining to encompass in one's glance at the varied world, the common thread, the unifying theme through immense diversity. I concur. I don't know if y'all have any closing thoughts or answers to the questions positioned for the end of chapter 11. I'll give it a second to refresh itself before I end this all together. Ooh, don't knock the computer over, Jouelzy. Before I close this all over, and then we will. Denisha, come join the cohort. So can you for Duma. And if anybody wants to join the cohort in general, you are more than welcome to. We do need more people that will come do the video chats, even if they don't necessarily have time to produce the syllabi itself. So different people do different things. It's all appreciated. It's all needed, and I actually need to follow up people in the cohort. I am so overwhelmed. But thank y'all for joining. Oh, that's what I meant to do on my phone. Not check my email. Because I'm thinking, I'm going to go for a bike ride after this, but I need to post the, my phone's so fugazi. Let me just check the group my daggone self. And see if any other comments. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I am going to close out here because the lag is real. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope this was insightful. We'll see y'all for next week to start discussing chapter 12. And if you've thought about it, just go ahead and do it. Come on and join the cohort. All right, I'm out.